Do you remember those cars? The ones you drove when money was tight but freedom still mattered? In the 1970s, these humble machines carried working-class families through long commutes, weekend errands, and lives built on grit instead of glamour. Looking back now, how did something so cheap manage to mean so much? The Ford Pinto was supposed to be the people's car of the 1970s, a small, affordable option for families feeling the pinch of a struggling economy. It was light, modern, and efficient, the kind of car that promised freedom without the price tag. But what drivers got instead was one of the most infamous safety disasters in American automotive history. The Pinto's rear gas tank was a ticking time bomb, vulnerable to exploding in rear-end collisions. Yet for years, families kept driving them because they had no other choice. You would see Pintos sputtering along highways, packed with groceries, kids, and hoped that it would make it another few months. Still, it was cheap to run, easy to fix, and looked good enough to make you feel proud, until you heard the news reports. People joked that the Pinto was the only car where a fender bender could double as a barbecue. For those who owned one, it was a mix of pride and anxiety, a symbol of survival in an era of economic struggle. Despite everything, the Pinto sold millions, proving that in the 1970s, affordability beat fear every time. The car may have been flawed, but for countless Americans, it represented something powerful, the freedom to drive, even when the odds and the engineering were against you. The Chevrolet Vega came out of Detroit with huge expectations. It was going to save General Motors, win back the small car market, and stand as a proud answer to the rising wave of imports. At first glance, it looked like a winner. Sleek body, sporty feel, and low price. But once people started driving them, the honeymoon was over. The Vega's aluminum engine warped under heat, its body rusted faster than the paint could dry, and its reputation collapsed almost overnight. For many working-class Americans, though, it was all they could afford, and they drove it anyway. The Vega's promise of American innovation turned into the sound of an engine knocking 2 years in. But it was still your car, and you kept it running with duct tape, borrowed parts, and stubbornness. That was the thing about 1970s drivers. They didn't need perfection, just something that started in the morning. The Vega might have been a failure on paper, but it was a badge of perseverance for anyone who squeezed every last mile from it. The AMC Gremlin was the strangest-looking car of its time, and somehow that made it perfect for the 1970s. It was small, weirdly cut off in the back, and cheap enough to make you feel smart for buying one. AMC built it as an economy car, a way to keep up with gas-conscious buyers and compete against Ford and Chevrolet. The result looked like half a car, but it worked. It ran, it saved fuel, and it was simple to fix. For young families or first-time buyers, the Gremlin was a quirky kind of pride, different, affordable, and uniquely American. It became the underdog's car, loved by some, mocked by others. Teenagers painted flames on the sides, while parents just prayed it would survive the winter. Its oddball charm made it unforgettable, and even now, collectors restore them out of pure nostalgia for when weird was wonderful. The Gremlin was never glamorous, but it represented something honest. A car built for people who did not care what others thought as long as it got them home. The Chevrolet Chevette was a car that proved one simple truth: Americans would buy anything cheap enough. When it rolled off assembly lines in 1976, it promised affordability, economy, and nothing more. It was loud, underpowered, and slow, but it was also dependable in its own humble way. For broke college students, struggling families, and blue-collar workers, the Chevette became the go-to ride when every dollar mattered. Its boxy frame and buzzing engine didn't inspire confidence, but you could count on it to get you to work and back. It was the car that taught a generation humility. No one felt superior behind its wheel, but everyone felt grateful. You didn't own a Chevette to impress anyone. You owned it to keep moving when life was standing still. The Chevette was survival with a steering wheel, and that made it unforgettable. The car's lack of luxury became part of its identity. It was a badge of practicality in a decade obsessed with cutting costs. People learned to love its quirks, even as they cursed the uphill climbs and the endless rattle of the dashboard. You didn't brag about owning a Chevette, you just nodded at the neighbor who was fixing his too. It was the car for people who didn't need flash or speed, just four wheels, a steering wheel, and the will to keep going. The Dodge Dart was a car that outlasted its reputation. It was never flashy, never fancy, but it refused to die. Built tough, it handled rough roads, bad weather, and even worse maintenance. The Dart was the car your father handed down to you when you could not afford anything better, and somehow it kept running. Its simple design made it easy to fix, and its durability gave it an almost mythic status. It was the kind of car you forgot about until you realized it was still in the driveway, ready to go. People joked it could survive an earthquake, a flood, and two teenage drivers, and they weren't wrong. The Dart didn't win hearts with beauty. It earned loyalty through sheer stubbornness. It became the definition of working-class resilience, a car that didn't care about appearances as long as it started on the first try. Mechanics loved it for its simplicity. Drivers loved it because it simply refused to quit. In an era of high gas prices and low expectations, the Dart was dependable when nothing else was. It may not have turned heads, but it turned over, and that was all that mattered when money was tight. The Ford Maverick was Ford's answer to the simple question, what can we sell to people who cannot afford a Mustang? It was marketed as sleek, simple, and affordable. Three words that defined American car buying in the 1970s. With its rounded body and no-frills interior, the Maverick looked sportier than it actually was. Still, it was a hit with first-time buyers and families who just needed something that ran. Its small six-cylinder engine sipped gas during a time when every gallon counted. It was the kind of car you bought because it made sense, not because it made you proud. But for a few years, it fooled the world. It looked good enough to feel like a win. The Maverick was proof that sometimes pretending to have a sports car was just as satisfying as owning one. The Maverick was cheap but charming, the kind of car you could rely on even when it coughed on cold mornings. Ford called it the simple machine, and they were right. It didn't promise more than it could deliver. For people living paycheck to paycheck, that honesty mattered more than horsepower. The Maverick was the car that fit your budget, your driveway, and your life, proving that in hard times, reliability was the greatest luxury of all. The Chevrolet Nova was the family car for people who wanted to look successful but couldn't afford to be. Its name meant new, but for most buyers, it was a hand-me-down or bought used with hope and a prayer. The Nova was built solid, with enough power to make it feel respectable, even if it lacked the flash of more expensive models. It was practical, durable, and easy to fix, qualities that made it a favorite among working-class Americans. Every Nova had a story: long road trips, high school dates, late-night drives home from second jobs. It was the kind of car that blended into the background until it broke down, and then you realized how much you depended on it. It wasn't a dream car, but it was yours. And that meant something. The Nova's quiet loyalty made it a staple of the decade, a reminder that pride didn't come from price tags but from perseverance. The Plymouth Valiant was not the kind of car anyone bragged about owning. It was plain, boxy, and designed purely for function. But what it lacked in style, it made up for in reliability. In the 1970s, when cars broke down almost as often as the economy did, that meant everything. The Valiant started every morning, got you to work, and kept going for years with minimal maintenance. It was the car that outlasted marriages, mortgages, and even the mechanics who used to fix it. The Valiant didn't need attention. It just needed gas, and maybe a pat on the dashboard for good luck. Its quiet hum became the soundtrack of working-class America, proving that dignity could ride in on four faded tires. People joked that the Valiant could survive the apocalypse, and in a way, they were right. It wasn't pretty, but it ran forever, which made it priceless to families scraping by. You could ignore the peeling paint and cracked seats because the engine still purred like it was brand new. The Valiant was a quiet hero of its time, a car that expected nothing but gave everything back in dependability. The Volkswagen Beetle wasn't American, but by the 1970s it might as well have been. Cheap, Cheerful and impossible to kill, the Beetle became the car of the working class and the free-spirited alike. It didn't matter if you were a young hippie, a mechanic, or a single mom. If you needed a car that ran forever, you bought a Beetle. It was slow, noisy, and cramped, but it had personality, and that made up for everything. It was one of the few cars that could make people smile even when it was broken down on the side of the road. The Beetle's air-cooled engine made it simple enough for anyone with a wrench and patience to fix, and its unmistakable shape turned even the most mundane commute into something playful and full of life. Drivers bonded with their Beetles like old friends. They named them, fixed them themselves, and forgave every sputter because the car always made it home. The Beetle proved that reliability didn't have to come wrapped in luxury. It could come with a smile and a little backfire on the highway. It was a people's car in the truest sense, built for those who worked hard, spent little, and loved much. The AMC Hornet was the kind of car you bought when you couldn't afford to gamble on something new. It was sturdy, modest, and straightforward, a car built for the realities of the American road. While its design was simple, it had a quiet toughness that won over practical drivers. AMC made the Hornet to last, and it did, even as larger automakers mocked it for being cheap. But for families struggling through layoffs, high gas prices, and rising inflation, the Hornet was a lifeline. It was not a car for showrooms, it was a car for survival. You could fix it in your driveway, patch it with spare parts, and it would still keep running. It wasn't built to impress, it was built to endure, and that made it one of the most honest cars of its time. It represented a kind of dignity, the belief that you could still get by with less and not lose pride in the process. It wasn't glamorous, but it never tried to be. That was its strength. You could park it anywhere and know that it would start, even on the coldest morning. The Hornet may have flown under the radar, but for those who drove it, it was proof that practicality could still feel like pride. The Datsun B210 was the little engine that could, or at least tried. At a time when American cars were getting bigger, heavier, and thirstier, this tiny Japanese import snuck in and became the working man's best friend. It was light, efficient, and affordable, perfect for an era when every gallon of gas felt like a gamble. The B210 wasn't about luxury, it was about survival on four wheels. It was cheap to buy, cheaper to maintain, and nearly indestructible if you treated it kindly. People underestimated it until they saw how long it lasted and how little it asked for in return. It may not have been glamorous, but it was honest. A car that never pretended to be anything other than what it was. The B210 didn't just save money, it saved people from walking when their wallets said otherwise. Its tinny doors and buzzy engine made it sound like a lawnmower in traffic. But to its owners, that hum meant independence. It was the car that could squeeze another 50 miles out of fumes when everyone else was stranded at the gas line. Even if people laughed at it, the B210 laughed right back, with another 200,000 miles still to go. In a world full of Detroit steel, the Datsun was the scrappy outsider that won by outlasting the competition. It may not have had the muscle or the shine, but for Americans on a budget, it was proof that small could be mighty. And sometimes, that was all you needed. The Toyota Corolla of the 1970s did not just change how Americans drove, it changed what they expected from a car. While domestic automakers pushed flash and horsepower, Toyota delivered quiet dependability and gas mileage that made sense during an oil crisis. At first, people bought them reluctantly, assuming foreign meant fragile. But then something unexpected happened. The Corollas refused to break down. They started every morning, ran for decades, and rarely complained. It was the first car that taught America what reliability really felt like. You could forget to change the oil, drive it across the country, and it would still forgive you. It didn't need flash or speed, it just needed fuel and a driver willing to believe in something built to last. In neighborhoods where rusted Fords sat motionless in driveways, the Corolla kept purring along, unbothered by time or terrain. Its simple interior and boxy charm hid an almost supernatural reliability that made it beloved by everyone from college students to retirees. Toyota had built a car that didn't need fixing, it just needed driving. The Corolla became the quiet revolution of the decade, showing America that value and endurance mattered more than vanity. For the poor and the practical, it wasn't just a car. It was a promise that tomorrow's paycheck would not be spent at the mechanic. The Plymouth Duster was what you bought when you wanted to look cool on a budget. It had the body of a muscle car and the heart of a family sedan, a compromise that defined 1970s America. Plymouth pitched it as fun, affordable, and just rebellious enough to make you feel young again. It came with stripes, spoilers, and dreams of drag races. But under the hood, it was often more bark than bite. It was the kind of car that made you feel fast, even when the speedometer said otherwise. The Duster's rumble, its bold lines, and its flashy paint gave working-class drivers a taste of freedom. For many, it was the closest they would ever come to owning a true muscle car, and that was good enough. Still, for working-class families, it was magic, a car that looked fast, even when it wasn't. Teenagers loved it, parents tolerated it, and no one could deny its charm. The Duster gave everyday drivers a glimpse of the good life without the guilt, and that made it special. You didn't have to be rich to feel like you belonged on the open road. You just had to keep the gas tank half full and the payments made. The Duster wasn't perfect, but it made you believe that cool didn't have to come with a Cadillac price tag. The AMC Pacer might be the strangest car ever built, and that's exactly why people remember it. When it hit the streets in 1975, it looked like something from outer space, wide, round, and full of glass. AMC called it the first wide small car, and for a moment it seemed like genius. Then people started realizing how heavy it was, how poor the visibility could be in sunlight, and how small the engine felt for such a bulbous body. But still, the Pacer had personality. It was weird in a lovable way, the kind of car that made strangers wave or laugh at stoplights. It turned heads for all the wrong reasons, but left an impression all the same. The Pacer dared to be different in a world that played it safe, and that alone made it iconic. It was the car of oddballs, dreamers, and anyone who couldn't afford to blend in. Kids called it a fishbowl, but owners saw it as futuristic, almost artful in its weirdness. And in a decade that loved bold experiments, the Pacer fit perfectly, even if it failed miserably. It was awkward, impractical, and unforgettable, just like the 1970s themselves. Today, people laugh at it, but back then it represented courage, the willingness to try something different when money and ideas were both running low. The Ford Granada was the car that tried to look rich when everyone was broke. Marketed as a luxury compact, it borrowed design cues from European sedans but cut corners everywhere else. The result was a car that looked elegant from afar but felt like a hand-me-down once you got inside. Still, that didn't matter much in 1975. People wanted dignity, not power. They wanted to drive something that made them feel respectable on the way to work or church. It was the kind of car that made you feel like you had moved up in the world, even if your paycheck said otherwise. In an era when image meant everything, the Granada gave middle-class America a chance to look the part. Beneath the plastic wood trim and squeaky vinyl seats, it held a quiet promise of better days ahead. The Granada's fake chrome trim and plush vinyl seats were pure theater, and buyers knew it, but they loved it anyway. It gave the illusion of success at a time when real success was out of reach. The Granada was a small piece of hope with hubcaps. It may not have driven like a dream, but for thousands of Americans, it made them feel like they hadn't fallen behind. And sometimes, in a decade of rising costs and fading dreams, that illusion was worth every cent. The Chevrolet Monza was supposed to be sporty, sleek, and full of promise. It looked good on paper, an affordable coupe with style borrowed from European designs. But beneath the polished exterior was another Vega in disguise. It burned oil, overheated, and rusted in the same places. Yet somehow, people kept buying it. It was cheap, and that was enough for most. It looked like freedom to those who couldn't afford a Camaro, a car that whispered, "You've made it," even when the bank account said otherwise. The Monza promised performance and independence, but most owners got repair bills and frustration instead. Still, there was something defiant about driving one. It was hope on four unbalanced tires. The Monza captured the spirit of false optimism that ran through much of the decade. Big dreams packed into small engines. Young drivers loved its low price and sporty image, even as it coughed its way up hills. It was a car that asked for faith and rewarded it with frustration. For families who couldn't afford more, though, the Monza was a ticket to motion, however imperfect. It wasn't a car you bragged about, it was a car you forgave. The Dodge Colt was the working man's import before anyone wanted to admit they liked imports. Built by Mitsubishi but rebadged by Dodge, it blended Japanese engineering with American branding. And that strange combination worked. The Colt was light, reliable, and economical at a time when American engines were still guzzling gas like it was 1959. It became the secret weapon of practical Americans, the kind who counted miles instead of horsepower. While muscle car owners laughed, Colt drivers quietly passed them at the gas station, still on the same tank. It was modest, unassuming, and quietly excellent at everything it needed to do. It didn't make you feel powerful, but it made you feel practical. Mechanics rarely saw one in for anything more than an oil change, and owners bragged about mileage that seemed impossible compared to their neighbor's Dodge Charger. For families trying to stretch every dollar, the Colt wasn't just a car, it was a relief. It ran quietly, rarely broke down, and always got you where you needed to go. The Colt proved that dependability could have style, even if it came from halfway around the world. The Pontiac Astra was proof that not everything with stripes and chrome deserved the word sporty. It was essentially a Chevrolet Vega in a different outfit. Same rust, same weak engine, same headaches. But for buyers who wanted the Pontiac badge without the Pontiac price, it made sense. The Astra was marketed to young people who wanted something fast and stylish but could only afford a used compact. It represented the American dream on clearance, a taste of performance and pride on a discount budget. The ads showed speed and power, but the reality was slow starts, rattling fenders, and constant trips to the shop. The Astra wasn't a muscle car, it was a costume, and people wore it proudly anyway. Underneath the paint job and decals, though, was disappointment waiting to happen. The aluminum engine warped like a cheap soda can, and every winter brought a new round of corrosion. But still, people tried to love it, because wanting to believe was half the fun of owning it. The Astra was a lie people wanted to believe in, a small piece of flash in a world of gray skies and smaller paychecks. The Buick Opel was a strange hybrid of American ambition and German practicality. Sold through Buick dealerships but built overseas, it was meant to give budget buyers a taste of European sophistication. The problem was, most people wanted a Buick because it felt American, big, bold, and comfortable. The Opel was none of those things. It was tight, efficient, and minimalist, a foreign exchange student trying to fit in at an American high school. It was the kind of car that confused buyers but impressed drivers. People expecting a soft, floating ride found sharp handling and surprising agility instead. It wasn't a Buick in spirit, but it was everything a struggling family needed. Thrifty, tough, and easy to love once you understood it. Still, the Opel had its charm. It handled better than most cars of its size and sipped gas like a gentleman. For the few who appreciated its odd blend of refinement and thrift, it was a hidden gem in a parking lot full of pretenders. The Buick Opel never became a hit, but it quietly showed that small could be smart long before Detroit wanted to admit it. The Gremlin X Sport Package was AMC's way of giving the economy car a little attitude. For a few extra dollars, you could get stripes, mag wheels, and a slightly beefier engine. It looked fast standing still, which was good, because it wasn't fast in motion. The X Package was marketing genius, selling flash to people who couldn't afford real muscle. Teenagers adored it. It was rebellion wrapped in vinyl, proof that you didn't need money to feel cool. Parents rolled their eyes, but kids saw freedom in every decal and spoiler. It was the dream of speed, packaged for the paycheck of reality. The bold paint jobs and fake performance made the Gremlin X feel like rebellion on a budget. Every kid who bought one thought they were driving something special, even as they got smoked at every red light. Still, the pride it gave was real. and for many, that was enough. The Gremlin X was not about horsepower, it was about hope. In the 1970s, that was often the most powerful thing you could drive. The Renault Le Car was the French answer to America's love of small, cheap transportation, and it showed up with the kind of charm only the 1970s could produce. It was tiny, lightweight, and full of personality, the kind of car that made you smile before you even turned the key. Imported by American Motors, the Le Car promised European sophistication for American simplicity. But what it really delivered was a rolling tin can with a good attitude. Its narrow body leaned in the wind, its small tires squealed at corners, and its heater barely worked. But it sipped fuel like a bird, and that counted for everything during the oil crisis. For many working-class families, the Le Car was the best way to stretch a paycheck and still make it to work on time. People loved it for its honesty. It didn't pretend to be fast or fancy. It was a car that admitted what it was: humble, economical, and a little odd. Even its cartoonish name, Le Car, felt like an inside joke between the driver and the road. It was slow, yes, but it had heart. The Renault Le Car was never about prestige. It was about getting by, laughing at life's imperfections, and proving that even the cheapest car could carry a sense of freedom. In the end, it might not have been durable, but for the few years it ran, it carried more personality than most luxury sedans of its time. The Mercury Comet was the kind of car you bought used, not new, and that was fine. It wasn't flashy, but it was faithful. For a generation of families scraping by, the Comet was that one car that seemed to survive everything: long winters, missed oil changes, and teenage drivers learning the hard way. It started as Mercury's compact version of the Ford Falcon, built with the same reliability, but given just enough style to look respectable in the company parking lot. The Comet didn't win awards, but it won hearts by showing up every morning without complaint. Its boxy frame and simple mechanics made it the perfect poor man's sedan: cheap to buy, cheaper to fix, and nearly impossible to kill. Every dent told a story. Every patch of rust carried memories of another year survived. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. A four-door symbol of doing the best you could with what you had. In a decade when cars were breaking down left and right, the Comet's quiet persistence made it feel like an old friend who never left your side. It was the car you inherited, drove into the ground, and then somehow revived again with a wrench and a prayer. Even after it was gone, you remembered the smell of its vinyl seats and the hum of its tired engine, a reminder that reliability doesn't have to shine to mean something. The Chevrolet Impala of the early 1970s was a ghost of its former self, a once mighty symbol of American luxury that had been stripped down for survival. Gone were the high-performance engines and gleaming chrome of the 1960s. What remained was a heavy, underpowered, budget-friendly version that appealed to anyone who still wanted a big car without the big price. The base model Impalas were massive but empty, like echoes of a dream America could no longer afford. Still, there was comfort in their size. The bench seats could fit half a family reunion, the trunk could hold a week's worth of groceries, and the ride was so soft it felt like floating through hard times. The Impala may have lost its glamour, but it gained a new identity as the everyman's cruiser, the car that said, "We might be broke, but we still drive a Chevy." Mechanics could fix them with a hammer and a good attitude, and that made all the difference. Even when the engine sputtered and the paint peeled, the Impala remained a proud relic of better days. A rolling reminder that the American dream was down, but not out. It was heavy, slow, and thirsty. But for families just trying to hold on, it was still a little piece of luxury on 4 worn-out tires. The Ford LTD2 was Detroit's last attempt to make big cars seem sensible. By the late 1970s, gas prices were rising, the economy was sinking, and no one wanted the land yachts of the previous decade. Yet Ford refused to give up. The LTD2 arrived as a downsized version of its predecessor, still long, still heavy, but wrapped in a modern shape that hinted at progress. It was a car that tried to blend pride with practicality, a noble effort that fell somewhere between success and surrender. To those who bought it, the LTD2 wasn't just transportation. It was a statement that you hadn't given up on comfort, even if you had to sacrifice everything else. The vinyl seats cracked in the sun, the carburetor coughed on cold mornings, but when it was running, it glided like a dream. Families filled it with groceries, kids, and hope, unaware that they were driving one of the last great dinosaurs of American steel. It was the final gasp of an era when bigger meant better, and even the poor could feel rich behind the wheel. For a generation that refused to trade pride for practicality, the LTD2 was the last hurrah, a farewell cruise for the age of excess. It didn't matter that it was inefficient or outdated. What mattered was that it still felt like something grand. The Subaru 360 was barely a car by American standards. It was smaller than some riding mowers and lighter than a Harley. But in the early 1970s, it found an unlikely audience among drivers who needed something cheap, efficient, and willing to go anywhere. Imported from Japan, the 360 was one of the tiniest cars ever sold in the United States, a two-stroke, two-cylinder experiment that looked more like a toy than a commuter. Its top speed barely reached 60 miles per hour downhill, and its paper-thin body panels dented if you leaned on them too hard. But for a few brave souls, it was perfect. The 360 wasn't about performance, it was about possibility. It let young families and first-time drivers experience the open road for a fraction of the price. And though people laughed at it, the 360 laughed back because it could go twice as far on half the gas. In an age of oil shocks and layoffs, it was the car for those who refused to stay still. It may have been slow, strange, and borderline unsafe, but it carried the spirit of determination that defined the decade. The Subaru 360 was proof that freedom didn't have to be fast or fancy. It just had to run. Boom boxes on shoulders defined the energy of the 1980s. These giant cassette players were not just for music. They were statements of confidence, style, and community. Teenagers carried them through city streets, blasting mixtapes loud enough for everyone to hear. The sight of someone with a boombox balanced on their shoulder became an iconic image of the decade. Music spilled into parks, playgrounds, and basketball courts, creating instant parties. The bigger the boombox, the more impressive you looked, and some models weighed nearly as much as a small child. Batteries cost a fortune and drained in hours, but the bragging rights were worth it. For many teens, carrying a boombox was as much about being seen as it was about being heard. The weight of the boombox hardly mattered compared to the pride of being the one in control of the music. Batteries drained fast, and tapes sometimes jammed, but nothing could dim the power of the boombox. It symbolized togetherness, an era before headphones turned listening into something private. Friends gathered around, sharing tracks and dancing on the spot. Today's portable speakers trace their roots back to the boombox, but they lack the bold presence of those hulking machines carried like trophies through the streets. Metal ice cube trays were cold, clunky, and unforgettable. Before plastic trays and automatic ice makers took over, these heavy-duty aluminum trays were the standard in American freezers during the 1960s. They had a removable divider with a metal lever that cracked the cubes free with a satisfying snap. But it was not always smooth. The handle sometimes stuck, the cubes often splintered, and if your hands were wet or too warm, the metal could stick to your fingers, something you only did once. Despite the fuss, there was something almost ceremonial about making ice. You filled the tray carefully, slid it into the freezer with steady hands, and waited. Hours later, you lifted the lever, twisted the tray, and heard that sharp mechanical crack as the cubes broke loose. It was noisy, it was physical, and it was reliable. Drinks were never the same without it. Whether you were filling a glass of Tang, cooling a cola, or preparing a highball for company, those chunky, slightly imperfect cubes were part of the experience. Today's ice makers are quiet and effortless, but they lack the charm and the muscle memory of prying open one of those stubborn metal trays. For many, it is a sound and struggle that still lives in the back of the mind. Arthur Treacher's fish and chips felt like someone dropped a British pub right into the middle of American suburbia, minus the beer and with a lot more deep frying. Named after the dapper English actor known for playing butlers in old films, this spot promised the classic British fish and chips experience, but with a crispy, golden American twist. The fish? Flaky, crunchy, and always steaming. The chips? Thick-cut fries that could double as a side or a meal, depending on how hungry you were. And do not forget the little tubs of malt vinegar that gave the whole meal a tangy kick. It was greasy comfort food at its finest, wrapped in paper and handed over with a wink. In its heyday, Arthur Treacher's had hundreds of locations scattered across the country. It was the place for people who wanted something fried but just a little different than burgers or chicken. Over time, competition and changing tastes wore it down. Most locations shuttered, leaving only a handful hanging on. But for anyone who grew up with one nearby, the smell of fried cod and vinegar still triggers a flood of memories. And speaking of memories, the next place on our list serves them up by the tray, with old-school charm, a flat-top grill, and a name that still rings out across the Midwest. No one was ready. Not the music industry, not the public, not even the moon, which he would soon walk across. In 1982, Michael Jackson released Thriller, a title that would come to define the very heartbeat of pop culture. This was not just an album, it was a tidal wave. Every track felt like it could carry its own legacy, but it was the music video, the short film really, that sent shockwaves through every living room in America. Red leather jackets, ghoulish dance moves, Vincent Price's eerie monologue echoing into a generation's dreams. It was scary. It was sexy. It was genius. Thriller redefined what a pop star could be. Michael was no longer just a singer. He was a world builder, a visual storyteller, a phenomenon. He shattered racial barriers on MTV, igniting a cultural shift that went beyond music. Parents, kids, teens, grandmothers, everyone danced, everyone watched. Thriller became a global obsession, and suddenly, Halloween had a new anthem: the glove, the lean, the laugh. It was not just entertainment, it was an event. To be alive in the 80s was to live in the shadow of Thriller. And to this day, nothing has ever moved quite like it. Neon everything was not a trend, it was a takeover. Shirts, socks, shoelaces, scrunchies. If it could be worn, it could be neon. Bright pinks, electric greens, yellows so vivid they could stop traffic. Walk into a classroom in the 1980s, and you might see a dozen students glowing like highlighters. It was not subtle, it was not sophisticated, but it was unforgettable. Neon made sure you were seen from across the street, or the roller rink. Entire outfits were built around one blinding shade. And the braver kids? They mixed them. A neon blue shirt with neon orange shorts and lime green shoelaces. Why not? Matching was optional. Visibility was everything. Neon told the world you were loud, proud, and unbothered by what anyone else thought. It showed up in birthday parties, aerobics tapes, and mall photo booths. Looking back now, it seems like a color explosion. But that was the magic. Neon was confidence in color form. It was youth, amplified. It was chaos, celebrated. And for those who wore it without a hint of irony, it was the brightest part of a decade that refused to dim. Walkmans with foam headphones were revolutionary, turning music into a private experience for the first time. Before then, music was shared through radios, boomboxes, or stereos blasting in living rooms. Suddenly, with a cassette player clipped to your belt, you could walk anywhere with your own personal soundtrack. The orange or yellow foam headphones became a symbol of individuality, instantly recognizable in school hallways and on city sidewalks. The hiss of cassettes and the click of buttons added their own rhythm to the music. Tapes sometimes tangled, forcing kids to rewind them with pencils. But the Walkman's novelty outweighed its flaws. Teenagers loved escaping into their own world while riding the bus or walking to school. Parents marveled at how quiet car rides became once everyone had their own Walkman. The device was more than a gadget, it was independence in your pocket, a way to carve out personal space in a noisy world. Today's earbuds owe everything to that foam-covered pair that made the 1980s feel like a personal concert. Hot Wheels did not just roll, they roared. When Mattel launched the line in 1968, it changed the way kids thought about toy cars. These were not slow, blocky replicas. Hot Wheels were sleek, bright, and built to race. The original 16 models included muscle cars, hot rods, and custom builds with names like Beatnik Bandit and Diora. They had real speed thanks to low-friction wheels and metal axles. But the real magic came when you laid down that iconic orange track. Loops, curves, jumps. Suddenly, your hallway became Daytona. Kids spent hours building elaborate courses from couches to floorboards to staircases. Some cars went so fast they hit the baseboard and flipped into the next room. The cars were pocket-sized, but they carried the weight of imagination. Each new release felt like a discovery. Paint jobs were wild, details were sharp. Collectors started forming almost immediately. And while other toy cars looked good sitting still, Hot Wheels looked best in motion, blurring by in a flash of chrome and flame decals. For many, it was not just about racing. It was about building your own world, one piece of orange track at a time. Zantigo Mexican restaurant may not be a household name anymore, but for a stretch of time, it gave Taco Bell a serious run for its money. Founded in the Midwest, Zantigo offered something just a little different. A menu that felt more daring, more flavorful, and somehow more authentic, even if it was all fast food. The crown jewel was the Chilito, a cheesy, spicy, burrito-like creation that sparked a cult following. You could argue all day about what made it so good. Some said it was the chili, others swore by the soft tortilla. But everyone agreed on one thing: it was addictive. Eventually, Taco Bell swooped in, acquired the chain, and folded many of the locations into their own branding. For years, the Chilito lived on in whispers and nostalgia forums until a small revival brought Zantigo back in limited form in Minnesota. But for most of us, it is just a flavor memory now. A quick lunch on a chilly day with steam rising from the wrapper. Speaking of wrappers and warmth, our next place was more than a pizzeria. It was a velvet-curtained hideaway with mob-themed charm and pizza that meant business. Going to the movies in the 1980s was not just an outing. It was an initiation. You did not just watch Back to the Future. You traveled in time. You did not just see E.T. You believed in aliens, friendship, and flying bikes. The Goonies made treasure hunts seem plausible in your own backyard. Ghostbusters had you checking every closet for slime. These were not just movies. They were portals, promises, and rites of passage. Every frame was burned into memory, every line quoted in playgrounds and lunchrooms. Blockbusters were not about selling tickets. They were about shaping imaginations. They gave us John Williams scores that made hearts race and Spielberg visions that made magic feel real. Crowds lined up outside theaters, popcorn in hand, hearts pounding. Parents, kids, teens, they all came together in the darkness of a movie theater to be transformed. These films were louder, brighter, funnier, and somehow deeper than anything that came before. And when the credits rolled, you did not leave the theater the same person who walked in. You left dreaming, you left changed. The movies of the 1980s did not just entertain a generation, they raised one. Roller rink parties were the ultimate birthday celebration of the 1980s. Kids rented skates, wobbled onto the floor, and gathered under the mirror ball as disco tracks filled the air. Neon lights flashed, walls glowed, and friends held hands as they spun in circles. Parents sat on benches with cake and pizza, ready for after-skate feasts. The sound of wheels rolling on hardwood mixed with laughter and shrieks of kids learning to balance. Some rinks even had DJs who doubled as party hosts, calling out contests or dedicating songs to the birthday kid. The excitement of a couples skate or a limbo contest added to the magic, even if half the kids fell flat on their faces. Photographs from these parties, kids in tube socks, striped shirts, and big grins, still feel like frozen time capsules of the decade. Rink employees often organized games like limbo or couples skates, adding to the excitement. The birthday child got the spotlight, skating with friends while the DJ announced their name over the speakers. Roller rink parties became legendary in memory, with photos of kids in striped shirts, bowl haircuts, and grins stretched ear to ear. For many, it was the first taste of independence, skating away from parents under flashing lights. Though roller rinks still exist, the 1980s parties hold a special glow, part disco, part childhood, and all magic. Record players were more than machines. They were furniture, ritual, and mood setters all in one. In the 1960s, every home had one, whether it stood alone on a tabletop or was built into a cabinet the size of a small sofa. You lifted the lid, selected a vinyl record, and gently placed it on the turntable. Then came the careful lowering of the needle, a tiny, deliberate act that brought a whole room to life. The crackle before the music started was half the experience. Whether it was the Beatles, Patsy Cline, or the Four Tops, the sound filled the air in a way no radio could match. You listened to full albums, start to finish. You memorized the order of songs. You stared at the cover art like it held secrets. Records were delicate, and so was the act of playing them. Dust had to be brushed off. Needles had to be replaced. Some turntables had automatic arms, others had to be nudged by hand. Either way, it felt like ceremony. The music had weight, not just in sound, but in the effort it took to hear it. Families gathered for listening nights. Teenagers escaped into headphones. A stack of records leaning against the wall told you everything about someone. And even when the music skipped, it felt like part of the charm. That moment when the room fell still, waiting for the needle to find its groove again, it was quiet, real, and unforgettable. Today, vinyl has made a comeback, but for those who grew up spinning hits in the 1960s, it never really left. Clancy's Hamburgers was not flashy, but that was exactly the point. This Midwestern chain was a tribute to the good old days. Think 1950s diner vibes with a 1980s sensibility. Red vinyl booths, checkered floors, and jukeboxes that never worked quite right. The menu was simple: hamburgers, fries, shakes, and maybe a tenderloin sandwich if you were feeling wild. But the flavor? Solid, dependable. The kind of burger that made you feel like everything was going to be just fine, even if you still had homework due. Clancy's peaked during the Reagan era, when families were looking for a bit of nostalgia with their ketchup. The chain kept it local, tight, and grounded, mostly popping up in Indiana and surrounding states. While national giants expanded aggressively, Clancy's stayed close to home. That was part of its charm, and maybe part of its downfall. Eventually, as tastes shifted and bigger players took over the burger scene, Clancy's began to disappear. But it never truly left the hearts of the folks who grew up on its milkshakes and diner tunes. If Clancy's was the taste of Americana, our next stop had a flavor all its own. Crunchy, spicy, and bright red as a fire truck, all straight out of the streets of Los Angeles. Saturday mornings were sacred. You rolled out of bed in your pajamas, poured a sugary mountain of cereal, and turned on the television like it was a portal to another world. And what greeted you? Magic. Pure animated magic. Shows like He-Man, Transformers, DuckTales, and the Smurfs made those few hours feel like a festival of joy. These were not just cartoons, they were lifelines. The stories were bold, the heroes fearless, and the villains just scary enough to make victory feel earned. You learned about justice from turtles in bandanas, loyalty from robotic cars, and friendship from ponies with glittering eyes. Commercial breaks were an art form. The toys matched the shows, and the shows matched your dreams. This was marketing fused with myth-making, and we loved every second. Your parents saw it as noise, but you knew better. It was a weekly escape from school, chores, and whatever sadness the week might have brought. Those mornings felt endless, like time itself was bending in your favor. The television glowed with color and hope. And as the final credits rolled and the sun climbed higher, you held on to those last cartoon moments like a secret handshake only kids understood. Arcades packed with quarters were the neon-lit playgrounds of the 1980s. The sounds of Pac-Man munching dots, Galaga ships firing, and pinball machines clanging filled the air. Kids carried pockets full of quarters, ready to line them up on machines to claim the next turn. The glow of screens reflected on eager faces as friends battled for high scores, often scrawling their initials into arcade legends. These arcades were more than games. They were gathering places where kids made friends, rivals, and memories. The excitement of walking into a buzzing arcade, carpet patterned in neon swirls, cannot be compared to playing at home today. Parents sometimes shook their heads at the noise, but for kids, it was magic. The smell of popcorn and soda mixed with the flashing lights to create an atmosphere that felt alive and endless. Losing quarters too fast was part of the thrill, teaching kids that every victory came with a cost. Today, arcades still exist, but the 1980s version was a golden age of flashing lights, pounding music, and the sound of coins falling into machines. The ground round was chaos, comfort, and childhood all wrapped into one. It was the kind of place where parents could get a beer and a burger while their kids threw peanut shells on the ground like it was encouraged. Because it was. The floors were covered in crunchy peanut bits. The air was filled with laughter and the faint smell of popcorn. There were projectors running old cartoons on the wall and kids with balloons trailing behind them like little parade floats. It was loud, it was joyful, and best of all, it felt like no one was trying to rush you out. The ground round leaned into its identity, part sports bar, part family funhouse. There was even a time when the cost of your meal was based on your weight. No, seriously, it was all part of the strange charm that kept people coming back. But as dining trends shifted and the novelty faded, so did the chain. Still, if you close your eyes, you can almost hear the crunch of a peanut shell underfoot. But if you were more into burgers and football than cartoons and chaos, our next place might have been your regular haunt. The Easy Bake Oven brought the thrill of baking into the tiny hands of children everywhere. Released by Kenner in 1963, it looked like a pastel-colored toy, but worked like real kitchen equipment, albeit powered by a common light bulb. Slide the cake tray in, wait just long enough for anticipation to bubble, and out came a warm, soft treat you made yourself. The cakes were tiny, the brownies a bit dense, but the pride was enormous. For many young kids, especially girls at the time, the Easy Bake Oven was a first taste of independence. No parental supervision needed, no open flames, just you and a cake mix in a miniature pan. It sparked creativity, confidence, and plenty of sibling rivalries over who got the bigger slice. The toy's appeal lasted for decades, but those original models with their sleek retro look and that gentle hum from the light bulb warming up have a special place in memory. Long before kids had screens and apps, this was hands-on, slightly messy, and totally satisfying play. The smell of a baking chocolate chip cake from a 40-watt bulb is not something you easily forget. There were bands, and then there were hair metal bands. They did not just play music, they exploded onto the stage. Bon Jovi, Mötley Crüe, Poison, these were not just names. They were icons with teased hair, eyeliner, and leather pants so tight they could probably break glass. The 80s were loud, flashy, and unapologetic, and hair metal was the soundtrack. These bands brought arena anthems and pyrotechnics and turned concerts into full-blown rock operas. They made being over-the-top a lifestyle. Power ballads met guitar solos that could melt your face off. It was glam, grit, and glory all rolled into a headbang, and they owned it. From the moment they strutted on stage, they dripped charisma and chaos. Music videos looked like wild fever dreams, smoke machines, motorcycles, women in fringe, and men who looked like peacocks in heat. And we loved it. Teens blasted them in bedrooms. Posters covered every inch of the wall. Even parents, reluctantly or not, knew the lyrics. These bands made rebellion look like theater, and for a generation that craved identity, they gave us swagger, eyeliner, and the kind of sound you could feel in your bones. Hair metal was not subtle, but neither was the 80s. Pepsi and Coke rivalry promotions were one of the defining battles of the 1980s. The Cola wars were fought in commercials, taste tests, and even at lunch tables in schools, where kids swore allegiance to one brand or the other. Pepsi positioned itself as the drink of the new generation, with flashy celebrity endorsements and ads that felt modern, while Coke leaned on tradition and nostalgia. The rivalry was everywhere, on billboards, in magazines, and during primetime television. Teens debated fiercely over which tasted better, often repeating slogans they had seen on television as if they were personal arguments. Pepsi's famous Challenge campaign had people sampling both sodas blind, with ads claiming Pepsi was the favorite. Coke fired back, but even made a mistake with the infamous New Coke formula, which quickly turned into one of the decade's biggest blunders. Despite the ups and downs, both brands managed to embed themselves into pop culture, with their logos and slogans plastered across clothing, posters, and collectibles. Looking back, the Cola Wars were about more than soda. They were about identity, belonging, and what it meant to be cool in the 1980s. Sambo's restaurant was once everywhere. At its peak, over 1,000 locations dotted the American map, and for a time, it was the breakfast joint. You walked in, saw the tiger stripe motif, and knew pancakes were on the way. The food was solid: fluffy pancakes, greasy bacon, big mugs of diner coffee. The kind of breakfast that left you needing a nap by 10 in the morning. But Sambo's legacy is tangled. Its name and branding, drawn from a children's book with racist origins, sparked increasing backlash as public awareness and cultural conversations shifted. People started asking hard questions about what a restaurant should represent. The food stayed consistent, but the reputation cracked. One by one, locations closed or rebranded. And while the last original Sambo's held on until 2020, even it finally changed names. Still, to many who grew up in its booths, it was not about the name. It was about pancake mornings with family and kids' meals with tiger-striped coloring books. But from syrupy stacks to something a little more British, the next forgotten favorite took a trip across the Atlantic and served up deep-fried nostalgia with a dash of malt vinegar. The future did not arrive with a bang. It arrived in a beige plastic box that hummed quietly on a desk in the corner of your house. The Commodore 64, the Apple Macintosh. These were not just machines. They were portals into something entirely new. You typed, and the screen listened. You clicked, and doors opened. At first, it was simple. Word processors, floppy disks, a little green cursor blinking like it had a secret. But quickly, it became more. Games, learning, possibility. For kids, it was a playground. For parents, a tool. For dreamers, a revolution. It changed homework. It changed jobs. It changed you. That blinking cursor? It whispered that anything was possible. Families gathered around, just trying to figure it out together. The sound of a printer was like the future on paper. And the internet? Still a myth. Still a whisper. But you felt it coming. With every boot-up chime, every pixelated game, every painstaking keystroke, you were stepping into a new world. Personal computers did not just change technology. They changed lives. And for the first time ever, the future was not in a sci-fi movie. It was sitting on your desk. Trapper keepers made schoolwork feel stylish in the 1980s. These colorful binders with Velcro flaps and bold designs turned ordinary assignments into something kids were proud to carry. Inside, folders, pockets, and dividers kept homework organized, at least in theory. The Velcro rip echoed through classrooms, sometimes to the annoyance of teachers. Kids compared designs, from neon shapes to pastel rainbows, showing off their personalities through stationery. The Velcro sound was so distinct that it became a kind of unofficial classroom soundtrack, punctuating quiet lessons with sharp rips. Kids traded covers, doodled on them, and personalized them with stickers, making each binder feel unique. Even now, that ripping sound can transport people instantly back to math class or study hall. Owning a Trapper Keeper was almost a social status symbol in school hallways. Parents appreciated the organization, while kids loved the flair. Unlike plain binders, Trapper Keepers added personality to even the most boring classes. By the end of the decade, they were a staple of back-to-school shopping, remembered fondly for turning homework into a fashion accessory. Today, they live on mostly as nostalgic collectibles, but in their time, they were the king of the classroom. If the 80s had a personality, it was neon, loud, proud, and impossible to ignore. Color was not just a trend, it was a statement, and no one whispered. Leg warmers in hot pink, tracksuits in electric blue, eyeshadow that could stop traffic. The entire decade looked like it had been dipped in a highlighter and blasted with a disco ball. It was not about subtlety. It was about standing out. Walk into any mall, any gym, any music video, and it was a rainbow riot. But this was not chaos. It was confidence. Kids wore neon shoelaces. Adults rocked neon windbreakers. Even toys and commercials buzzed with that wild fluorescent glow. It was the decade where fashion turned into rebellion through brightness, because after the muted earth tones of the 70s, the 80s decided to scream. And we listened. We wore color like armor. We matched green earrings to orange belts without blinking. Fashion became a kind of freedom, to be seen, to be remembered, to be unapologetically alive. And yeah, sometimes it was ridiculous. But it was fun. It was electric. And most of all, it was a sign of the times, a wild, glowing, unforgettable beacon of 80s spirit. If these cars brought back memories of tight budgets, long drives, or the stubborn pride of keeping an old clunker alive, tell us which one you or your family drove in the comments. Tap that like button to keep the engine running, and subscribe for more trips down America's dusty back roads of history.